as promised, I wanted to go back and get some more going second gameplay with the Amber Emerald Mufasa 2.0 deck. The deck list and the first video is linked in the description, but I think that this deck really only has so much you can explore right now. What's actually kind of interesting is that I think that with Into the Inklands coming out very soon, the Amber packages will get a nice non-questing way to gain lore. We kind of have Christopher Robin, but that's not really used right now, obviously. But with some of the new cards coming in from Into the Inklands, I think that this deck might be able to clutch out some additional wins without needing to quest. Right now, the reason that this 2.0 version is a little bit more resilient than the original version, in my opinion, is because of the additions of things like Cusco. There's been a couple of times, and in this match you'll see it as well, where Cusco just comes in clutch, dropping it down when I'm on 17 or 18 lore, and if my opponent doesn't have that non-chosen removal, they can't deal with the Cusco because it's not interactable considering it has ward. So it just kind of sits there. Your opponent can Hades it, let it go it, Maleficent Dragon it if it's late in the game and they're actually casting that. They basically have to like double grab your swords or like be prepared or Lady Tremaine when you have nothing else on field in order to actually out the Cusco. And that can be very hard to try to play around. So usually with this deck, you're aggroing your way up to that point anyways when you're at like 17, 18 lore, and then Cusco can just clutch out the game for you. Smart players will definitely be able to play around the Mufasa though. For example, Sapphire deals with it very well because they can just bounce it into your, not bounce, but put it into your Inkwell with the Hades or Let It Go. Amethyst, if they're playing Hades, like the Amethyst Steel Floodborn builds, they can Yzma it back into your deck and give you a draw 2. And you don't really care too much about getting the draw. Like normally you'd be like, that's great, I get to draw 2, but this deck is so tempo oriented that you care more about the board presence and putting the questing pressure on board than you do about the card advantage. Because as you can see here, and this is one of the reasons I don't like aggro, like I just have to keep questing. Like I lost my dock to the Jafar, I think it was, and the opponent just drew a card off of it. I went negative off of that dock, but it paid it did its job, right? It did its purpose where it was allowing me to play ahead on curve, but I still lost that resource. And you can see like the game looks a little dicey. It's getting a little away from me. This opponent's board is getting quite wide, and if they're going to be able to clear and or deal with my board, which as you can see this grab your sword definitely does, and then their Jafar takes out my Mufasa, it's going to be hard for me to deal with. The Hades here is a nice top deck off the Mufasa, but again, it's a little slow. The Hades is going to be able to get me back in Mufasa, but I need to be able to actually put something on board to quest. And right now, if they opt to take out my, or actually they can take out the Hades if they crash the Hercules into it, I guess, but it's probably not worth it for them. Actually, it might be to slow me down, but the questing with the Tinkerbell for 2 is nice to 15, but the opponent is getting up there, right? If they're able to play 1 or 2 more cards on board, they're going to be able to quest for game, and this is where something like top decking that Genie and playing Genie in general is really clutch, because again, you are so tempo oriented. This is a tempo or nothing deck, right? You have to maintain proper tempo in order to win, because the slightest derailment of you playing properly will allow your opponent to just flood the board and just out aggro you, out your threats, put you on, you can't quest for game, and then they're able to just win the game basically. So at this point, my opponent is going to opt to slow me down a little bit. They have to deal with this Tinkerbell. They crashed their Hercules, which they probably should have done last turn, but they have 5 questing on board. They can't quest with the Hiram since we bounced it to slow them down. They are able to let the Storm Rage on our Tinkerbell, which is not great for me because now I went from having game on board to having to wait an extra turn to quest with this Genie. And I'm still vulnerable, right? Sapphire, if they're playing the Let It Goes and or Hades, my board's going to get outed. Thankfully, we top deck the Cusco here, and this is what clutches the game out for me, because even if the opponent has a Let It Go or the Hades, they can get rid of the Genie, but they cannot deal with the Cusco. They would need double grab your swords, which is what I think they're digging for here. And then I think they even cast a whole new world and ditch their whole hand, which is kind of wild. I don't know if they inked yet, so they might. No, they can't. They wouldn't be able to double cast grab your sword. So there's like nothing this opponent can do, I don't think, at this point to win the game. So yeah, it was a GG's, but you can see why Cusco in this 2.0 version is so clutch, and why it can just edge out games for you in the win. And this was going second, right, where this deck really suffers. So this is just another example of kind of how you try to play on curve and maintain tempo and just disrupt your opponent just enough so that you can edge out a win. Again, I do not like this style of gameplay. I prefer control builds where I know my options instead of just having to kind of rely on what seems like luck in order to curve out properly, but we still end up taking that win. Let's go ahead and look at the next match. All right, in this next matchup here, I'm going to essentially showcase for you why the Amber Emerald MUFASA 2.0 deck can be so devastating, because even when you go second, if you kind of generate any form of advantage as long as you keep playing on curve, let's say your opponent misses a drop or something, if you establish that tempo and your opponent is trying to set something up, if they're playing a slower deck, you will absolutely just run them over if they have no interaction for your board before turn 7. And as we know, Ruby likes to play Be Prepared, or has to play Be Prepared basically, but that's very far away, right, on turn 7. The Popsicle Ruby Sapphire deck can definitely do work against this deck, and the Sapphire Steel, which you just saw me play against technically, should also have a good matchup against Amber Emerald MUFASA. But in this matchup here, and I am a fan of the Emerald Ruby deck. I think it's a kind of an underrated color combination, but my opponent misses a drop on turn 3. They did ink, they have 3 ink there, but not playing something on turn 3 switches tempo back to me. They were playing on curve nicely with a 1-drop and 2-drop from there, but yeah, missing that 3-drop just puts them a little bit behind the 8 ball here. And as a result, now with this dock on field, we're going to get the Lantern effect, and we're going to skip our turn 4 and do a turn 5 drop on turn 4. They establish a Dinner Belt, which I'm a big fan of this card, but it is very slow, right? And as a result, like it's a dead card in this matchup, because you've lost 2 turns of tempo, because you didn't play something on turn 3 and you try to set up your Dinner Bell on turn 4. Now you're just way too far behind. You're not going to be able to get to turn 7 where you're going to be able to cast your Be Prepared if you even have it there. And as you can see here, yeah, it's just like too little too late. The opponent has to end up crashing their Minnie Mouse into our card there and into our queen in order to draw. And again, it's just way too slow for this matchup. So we're just going to go ahead and quest with everything and then use the Doc's ability to finish the game off with a Cusco, because again, turn 6, the opponent is 1 away from Be Prepared still. And this is what this deck aims to do. We just run them over, and it was a super quick match. Yeah, they have some forms of tempo disruption, but at this point it's too little too late. So they're just going to pass turn, and we're going to end the game off with a Cusco after giving them the well played. So you may see a match like that and think, wow, this deck seems so strong, it's explosive, it just runs over the opponent, and you just keep turning stuff sideways and win the game. And yes, you can do that, but in certain other matchups, like what you see here against Ruby Amethyst, it can be a little harder when your opponent tries to control the board, and obviously Steel is good at that as well. In this clip though, we are using version 1, which is using the Panic and Pain engine, and linked in the description, I talk about why the version 2.0 might just be a little bit better for consistency reasons, talking about why you have to play, so many 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops in order to play perfectly on curve and increase that consistency. Because in this matchup here, you see I have the Panic but no Pain. My opponent tries to bait me here by not readying up their Olaf, because they want me to crash into it so that they can Mim Fox and, get back their LeFou, which is just free advantage for them. So I just opt to continue to do my best to play characters and not quest with the queen there, not falling for the Mim Fox, and sure enough, they had it in hand. So for those of you that think the opponent may have misplayed there, no, they were definitely playing smart and trying to bait me. Thankfully, we didn't fall for it. And again, they're playing a little slow, right? This is Ruby Amethyst. They're still playing on curve nicely, but you don't really see LeFou in the tier 0 version, but it has some utility with Arthur if they're playing that as a combo piece. And we're opting to actually play a little bit more of a control game here and take out the opponent's cards, because I saw the opportunity to stabilize the board state. Whereas normally you wouldn't want to do this, but the reason I do that is because seeing them income in Fox, I think that they might have one. But again, we have control of the board here. We're still a couple turns away from Be Prepared, and we're just trying to see how much lore we can put on board before we get it Be Prepared, or before we do get Be Prepared, right? And our board gets wiped. And the whole thing is that, MUFASA is supposed to play around this. This deck was kind of designed in order to try to beat Ruby Amethyst more consistently. And if they do Be Prepared us, the MUFASA should replace itself, leaving you with a character on board for your turn when they pass back, because they likely use their turn to cast the Be Prepared, meaning they can't do any other follow-up. And as a result, you still have a questing card on board from the MUFASA. The difficulty is that if your MUFASA is exerted and they out it, then they can Be Prepared afterwards. So for example, this right here, I mean, they played Maui for turn, so they can't cast to Be Prepared if they opt to take out my Mufasa right now. But if they take out my Mufasa with an existing Maui, which is on the board right now, and then my next character comes in Exerted, then they just Be Prepared after that, right after the Mufasa triggers. So I have to out this move. I have to out this Maui, sorry, which I can do with the Queen. So again, a nice little side synergy with the Queen being able to buff and debuff characters. And I'm gonna set it up so that, you know, either you don't quest, so you don't kind of catch up to me with the mini mouse, because you're gonna have to use your mini mouse to crash into my Mufasa so that you can Be Prepared next turn, or you Be Prepared after you quest and then you don't play anything and I still get the follow up off the Mufasa. So you can see kind of the mind games that you have to kind of play with this matchup. They do have a Lady Tremaine, which is pretty strong, so no Be Prepared, right? That kind of uses up their ink for the turn, which is nice, but we're not necessarily out of the woods. The opponent can definitely stall me out from here. They make a misplay in my opinion here. Again, I don't know what's in their hand, but seeing what they end up doing next turn, inking that snake just costs them the game. So we end up just saying, okay, let's quest with this Mufasa. If they have the Be Prepared, so be it. I put another questing threat on board, forcing them to have a Be Prepared, or another way to out both my Mufasa, the card it gets, and the Panic on board if they do have a Be Prepared. But look at this, they didn't even need to do that because they end up dropping a goat and they couldn't go to 19. If they would have kept that snake in hand, they just play snake, bounce back, goat, and they win the game. So despite this deck supposed to be having a good matchup, especially when going first against Ruby Amethyst, you can see why Ruby Amethyst is just so strong. This final clip that I want to show you though is against Emerald Steel Discard. And again, going first, even going second, this should have a pretty good matchup against Discard. I have played Amber, Emerald, Mufasa in real life against two Discard decks, an Amber, Emerald, Discard, ironically enough, same color combo, and an Emerald Steel, and I won them both. And then online, I think I played two Emerald Steel Discards, and I won them both as well, going first in both of them, unfortunately. But the reason why this deck is so strong is because by the time the discard engine gets set up, you know, assuming they get perfect curve, which is Bucky into John on turns 2 and 3, into a Floodborn, Jafar Dreadnought, or Donald Duck on turn 4 to force the discard and draw off Prince John. By that point, especially if you go first, you've already docked and skipped your turn 4 to play a 5-drop on turn 4, and you've likely just emptied your whole hand, so your opponent isn't really going to generate much draw engine off of the Prince John if they only get like one discard off of it, and you're just playing your top deck anyways, right? Or inking it. So this deck can just flood the board here, and as you can see, the opponent kind of already realizes that it's game, and they just end up scooping because they couldn't get anything online. Anyways, that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this video. Again, check the description for the deck list portion of the explanation for how this deck was built and kind of the ideas behind it. If you made it this far in the video, a like would be appreciated. Thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.